This is the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and welcome all you fellow bonsai lovers. Appreciate you listening in, coming back, tuning in. This is episode 42 for 2023. Kicking along. lots and lots of bonsai chat this year. I've been loving it. It's great, and I find myself inspired every time I walk around the yard to add something new to the podcast or reiterate a really important point, and that's what I want to do with this podcast. You know, around the yard, I've been working a lot lately with our late spring pruning that has to happen, and making sure that I've got a bit of a checklist that I go through in my head to make sure that I don't miss things and that I work things thoroughly enough. And a couple of those points are, if it's, I'm always looking at trees, and one in particular I just did some work on was a nice big liquid amber that I've got, and I love it. It's got a really nice full foliage structure, the beautiful trunk on it's so old, and it's got lots of bark on it. It's got to be one of my favourite trees. I know I say that about a lot of them, but this liquid amber, I particularly love that species, the way that they grow, and when you cut them too, like they have a smell to them, and that emotion that it kicks in for me is when I was a little kid. It's probably a bit oversharing, but when I was a little kid, my nan and pa had one in their backyard, and we used to get up and climb up to as high as we possibly could. Used to think we were, 10 stories up, but it's probably maybe a couple of metres off the ground when we were little. But I still remember that thought comes to my head even now when I get out there and I prune the leaves or cut foliage back or whatever. But anyway, so I was working on this bonsai. And I've worked on a few others too, a couple of my big deciduous I've been working through, a few areas I've let sort of grow and extend to improve the strength of the trees, and now it's time for a bit of a cutback. And one of the things that goes through my head is if it's too thick, you've got to cut it off. And that kept coming back to me over and over and over. Forget about the silhouette. If you look at the branch structure and the tips of the branches, especially around the apex, are starting to get too thick, you've got to remove it, come back to some lighter buds in there sooner or later. And I find that's a good one. If it's too dense, that's another thing on my checklist. If it's too dense when I'm working through there, fix it. Do something about it. It doesn't have to be a complete defoliation. It doesn't have to be, anything more vigorous than taking off a few leaves around that area to make sure that light and air gets in there that I keep banging on about. Have a look at the weeds. If you ever want to feel better about having weeds in your bonsai, just come to my place and have a walk around the yard and have a look, because they're everywhere. I diligently work on them, but so many trees get from one end to the other. By the time I get through them, they've shot back and they've grown all. One of the trees that maybe slips past my radar on a daily basis tends to get inundated. And the other thing I'm looking for is pests. At the moment it seems to be good old caterpillar season for us in Melbourne. They're everywhere. See them on the cedars, pulling in the needle bunches together. See them on junipers on the weekend. I've seen them on my deciduous as I'm walking around the yard. There's lots of little butterfly eggs around the place as well. So that's the four things that go through my head as I'm working on the trees. But anyway, that's enough. This podcast, I'm going to talk a bit about the Japanese pines and what to look for as we head in towards decandling, which I promised I would do from the last one. And I'm going to just talk. Had the juniper intensive, and we came up with a Deadwood checklist, and I want to zip through that in the podcast as well. So strap yourselves in, get yourself something nice and cool to drink. If you're in the southern hemisphere, if you're in the northern hemisphere, get yourself something nice and warm and enjoy. Righto, so as we get into this podcast, I just want to have a bit of a shout out to a bonsai mate of mine, Andrew Selman. I've talked about him before in earlier podcasts. He's one of the talents we have in Australia for bonsai, and he's just in a bit of a rough spot at the moment. So, mate, just thinking of you and sending you lots of bonsai love and keep going, mate. Keep fighting. So, Japanese black pines. We head into early summer, and for me, in my yard and with my trees, that's the disclaimer part. I do my decandling in the early part of December. The earlier I do it, the bigger the tree, because obviously the earlier you do it, the longer the growing period you're leaving, so therefore the bigger needles you're going to get, the bigger internodes. And the smaller trees, common sense, you leave it a little bit later because you want to shorten the growing period shorter needles, whatever. Anyway, another part of the disclaimer with that is to don't leave your trees, even if you want really, really small needles, think about the horticultural requirements for the tree, and if you make those needles too small, then you're going to have an issue with the strength of that tree in the coming year. So even if you want really, really small needles on your Japanese black pine, I wouldn't encourage it. So keep it logical, keep it in scheme with what you're trying to achieve with that tree and the size of the tree, and decandle accordingly. All right, so as we head towards decandling, now's about the time that I have a quick whip around the yard and I have a look, and that's what I want to talk about in the podcast. You can get easily lulled into a false sense of security with your decandling. That it's just something that you automatically do. It's either something that you automatically do, or it's something that you say in a period cycle, whatever it is. Might be, I don't know, 2-3 years. That's 3 years seems to be about the common approach, where you don't decandle your trees every third year. I think that's crazy. It's not what I do. I don't automatically not decandle. The only time I don't decandle is if there's a problem with the tree. If there's a strength or health issue with the black pine, then I won't decandle. And that's what I want this podcast to be about, is to be a sort of a reminder, I suppose, or things to look out for when it comes to deciding whether you're going to be doing decandling or not. And if you're not going to be doing the decandling, then it's probably time now to isolate the trees and have a good look at them and see what's going on with the tree and make an alternative plan for that pine, because missing decandling is a major thing. If the tree is strong and healthy and you don't decandle it, what happens is where the bud grew, it continues to elongate, continues to push, continues to get longer, and so you'll end up with a very long branch. And you, by decandling, what we're doing is we're forcing a second flush of growth to activate dormant buds, to give us shorter needles based on the time of year that we do it, and to give us a division, give us a choice. Hopefully we get more than 2 buds activate from the side of doing the decandling, and then we can come back to 2 in autumn winter when we're doing our bud selection and needle plucking and shaping and styling and all that sort of stuff. So by not decandling a strong tree, a strong pine, black pine, and decandling only applies to black and red pines, as far as I'm concerned. Don't apply this technique to any other pines that you have in your yard. No, not white pines, not mugos, not Scots, none of that stuff. So just this part is only for Japanese black pines and Japanese red pines. So when I say black pine, I mean red pine, obviously. But by not decandling a strong black pine, you're pushing that growth further and further away from the trunk of the tree. It's going to get longer and longer. So the only way that we can really manage it is by decandling. And that's a proven fact. It's been happening now for a while around the world, and I'm sure anyone listening to this now that's got black pines will have decandled. But where I find that the issue comes from, and the reason for chatting about it, is continuing to decandle a tree that possibly shouldn't be. And a few things that I look out for in regard to my pines and what I'm going to be looking for, I suppose, is a couple of things. So one is the spring candle that's grown. It should have shot out. We've had months of good growth now. I can't talk about other states around Australia, but in Victoria, the weather's been really mild. Had a few warm days, a little bit of humidity. If anything, it's probably been a bit cooler and a bit wetter than normal for this point in the year. Mates in Western Australia are getting flogged with bushfires and high 30s, 40 degrees. It seems to be happening all over the place. Adelaide, South Australia, they've had some warm weather as well. Queensland definitely has, and Sydney's been getting flogged with humidity. So it's all happening different for different parts of the country. But for me, what I'm seeing with a lot of my trees is the spring candle that's grown has got like a nice green neck on it. Like if you look at where that bud has started to grow, and you see that it's got a nice long neck on it, then you'll see that it's strong and it's healthy. All right, and from that you should see a good cluster of needles that have grown and be really strong and vibrant and good colour. Like that's the main thing, is a really strong, good colour of needle. You don't want them where they're washed out and pale or even heading towards the yellow side of things. You want them where they're nice and lush and green and there's a long, strong neck. When you don't see those things, that's the red flag for me. That's where I will make an assessment on that tree. If the neck of the base of the new spring candle is only really, really small, then I've got to take other factors into account. I look over the entire tree and say, well, okay, how many of these spring candles have I got on the tree? And if the tree's only young, and let's say there's 50 on the tree, then and it's short, then I'll say, hang on, there's a strength issue with this tree, and I'll start looking backwards. Okay, was it fed? Was it repotted? Has it been getting enough sunlight? Is there any kind of infection or any kind of infestation of pests on the tree? What's the soil feel like? Does it smell? Does the soil really stink like it's rotting? Is there a root issue with this tree? If I look at the tree and I see that there's 500 or 600 spring candles over these trees, because it's a really dense one, a really old one, and they're all shot out and they're all really small, then I'll make the assessment and say that's okay, because the tree's evenly distributing the growth over the whole foliage mass. So then I would tick the box and say, yes, I reckon that one's going to be okay to be decandled, because it's consistent across the whole thing. So you need to be a bit flexible with how you look at it. But if you look at the trees now, look at your pines now, your black pines, and you get that inkling, hey, this thing doesn't look right, or there's only a few candles on it that have shot off and the rest have stayed really small, then you've got to probably make the decision now, nice and early, to say that's not one that's going to get decandled. And if it's not going to get decandled, what's your plan going to be? My plan for it would be, okay, do I look at, say selective decandling just on the strongest areas to try and keep some of that growth back in there? Or do I suddenly say, well, okay, those ones that have shot out long, I'm going to keep those to increase the vigour of the tree overall, and then when it comes to autumn, winter next year, once hopefully the tree turns the corner, or I can do something with it, then I can reduce that whole part of the branch and take it off completely, which is a really viable one too. I like to use these sacrifice branches or certain branches on the tree to push out, increase the overall strength and vigour of the tree. Then when I see the whole tree starting to lift up a little bit, then I come back in and remove those longer shoots. So that can be something that starts to happen as well. If you do find that you're not going to be decandling, you really need to do an assessment of the tree. You need to have a good hard look at it and say, what was missed? What's caused this tree to be weaker? And you've still got time now to increase the feeding regime for that tree once you fix what the problem is. Often for me it'll be, I have to get the tree, I have to deal with the pest issue that's on the tree, because often as the pines get weaker, they do get these issues with it. The white fluffy pine algids, they'll come onto the tips, and they'll cause a bit of an issue, but they're symptomatic of the problem. They're showing me that something's wrong with the overall strength and health of this tree. Invariably for me, it comes back to lack of repotting or incorrect repotting or some kind of an issue with the root system of your black pine. That's where the true strength of your black pine comes from, is through its root system. So you've got to make sure that if it is, compacted, if watering's becoming a real issue, you put a moisture meter in there and it's bone dry on the inside of that root system, then you've got to do something about it, and that can be maybe taking off, scratching off the top layer of the soil mix, getting a Phillips head screwdriver in there and just sort of lightly aerating around the pot in, half a dozen sort of areas, not breaking, not jackhammering it and breaking the root system up, but just opening up to let some air, water transfer to happen inside that root ball. And when you water, it's going to get in there. Maybe it's a light layer of sphagnum moss on top of the soil as well to sort of help a little bit of extra moisture get into that inner core of the root ball. And then followed by that, it would be, so I'd have a pest issue I'd have to deal with, whether it's spraying or whether it's a natural remedy. The soil, top layer reduction, and then the aeration of the soil mix. If you sort of find that you're taking down a little bit much of the soil as you're doing it, because it might be a deep pot or something like that, so you can come down below the lip of the pot, then you can top it up with some new soil in there as well, and put that sphagnum moss layer on top of it as well. And I would use that to try and help keep a bit more moisture as you head towards the summer period for your trees. And then I would instead of saying, okay, I'm getting towards the end of spring, I'm not going to fertilise this tree, I'd be saying, no, I've got to fertilise right the way through. The growing period for your black pine is quite long. So by fertilising throughout the summer period, which is not what I'd normally do when I decandle, I take off the fertiliser. But as this is a weaker version of the tree, then I'm going to be fertilising it right the way through all of summer, and then right the way through autumn in the build up. But the aim for a tree that you're not decandling is health and strength improvement. That's it. No structural work, no wiring, no branch removal, no stuffing around with the tree system, no early repotting. It's all about making sure that you can manage it, keep it going on the straight and narrow, and improving as much as you possibly can until you get an opportunity to fix what the problem is. And if it's repotting, then you wait till very late in winter to repot your pines and fix the problem, and then go into the new spring next year with a tree that's strong and healthy but hasn't died. So I would just warn you against decandling something which you look at it, you've got an inkling something's not right about it. If the candle lengths are all over the shop, that's different. That's can come from the tree not being balanced. But if you look at the tree and there's some major health issues, there's not a lot of new needles on there, tree looks really wispy. Maybe it's because of where the tree's kept to. It might not be in as sunny a spot, as an open a spot as what it actually needs to thrive and survive. Then you're going to need to fix that as well. If it's environmental, you're going to need to be on it. So you really want to keep an eye on the strength and health of the tree. Make a decision early if you're going to be decandling or not, because if you are, you'll find that if you've got a lot of trees like I do with black pines, I get into it and automatically just jump straight in and start doing it. It's once I've made this assessment over the next week or so, then I decide, I isolate, I put the trees to the side, I look to improve the health and strength of those ones, but everything else that's in the bench that says, yes, I'm going to be decandle, it's like, okay, based on the size, big ones first, you're in the workshop, all right, work my way through to the middle ones, then get to the small ones last, and that's the only way you can really get through a hell of a lot of trees when you're decandling. Okay, so I had a juniper intensive the other week, and that was a blast. A lot of fun. Really, really nice. Really good people, as always. And it's amazing what you can get through in a couple of days with the trees. And one of the things that was part of the learning process, I suppose, was the creation of Deadwood on the trunk, so shari line, on a juniper. And came up with a checklist for the intensive, and I just wanted to share that as part of the podcast as well. Just hopefully provides a bit of insight and help to anyone that's wanting to do that sort of work. As I said, it's timely for me with my junipers. I use any time from now on right through summer as my go time to work on them. They're possibly due for a bit of a trim about now. It's nice as we get towards the warmer month too that once I've got through decandling and I've done a bit more on the Australian natives, then I find that things can settle down. I have a bit of a lull in the system before we head towards autumn or fall, depending on where you are around the world, and I get a chance to actually work on my junipers around that time. So this Deadwood creation, it's got to do with the trunk of your juniper. And a couple of key pertinent facts with regard to junipers and the way that they're transporting through their vascular tissue, through their trunk, through their bark or their the cambium layer, that you need to be aware of is they're working with veins, right? So if you imagine, for want of simplicity, you get your fingers and you point them straight down, right? That's sort of how a juniper is going to grow when they grow straight up. But as you take that tree and you put wire on it and you bend it left to right, those live veins, the veins of flow, they go left and right as well. And if the tree is twisted around in circles, like a spiral staircase, then the vein follows around in that shape. It's with experience, you can get a general gist of where that vein is going to flow down a tree. And where you've got to be super careful is when you're creating your deadwood, if you cut across a vein, then you are going to kill the flow up and down. So you've got to let the vein dictate to you where the deadwood's going to be created. Okay, so you can't just get chalk and draw it around a trunk and expect it to follow that line, because you will very soon see in time to come that you've cut the live vein and therefore you've killed the foliage that's linked to that vein. So what I do is my simple checklist is 1, follow the vein. All right, so that's fundamentally exactly where you've got to start. The second point is make a small cut, follow. So what I do is I use a sharp blade, a Stanley knife, a retractable blade, something like that with a very fine point on it. I'll work out my start point, and that's number 3 is I work from the important section. So if I have, let's say, a key branch at the right-hand side, and beside that there's a dead branch in the middle, then I won't want to cut the live vein off or the flow that goes to the main branch, right? So I will pick the dead branch and say, okay, that's my point, that I'm going to work backwards from there. So I'm not going to go anywhere near that main branch, that key branch on the right-hand side, but I'm going to start working back from the dead branch that's in the middle, the gin. So I create a little V just below that. So it's at the higher point up the trunk, right? Rather than picking a low point down the bottom going, I really want the live vein to be here, I find that if I pick the highest point, the most important section of the tree where I don't want to kill the flow, and I work backwards from there, then I'm going to leave that intact. So I create a little V, then I'll pluck that out with the tip of the blade, and then either using my fingers or some needle nose pliers or even gin pliers, I'll just grab the fibre that comes out and I'll start to pull it. And that'll break, like it won't go very long. You might find it goes for a couple of centimetres. And so then I'll get the blade beside where it broke and I'll flick out a bit of the vein again, and I'll grab it with the pliers on my fingers and I'll start pulling it down. And then you'll see that those fibres, as they tear, they follow the direction of the vein. So if it starts to wrap around the tree, if it starts to go dead straight or starts to go to the left side, whatever it is, that's where the vein is. So you just follow it with a really light pull of this fibre right the way down as far as you want to make that shari, that deadwood on the trunk. And then the last part, the 2 last parts of my checklist are, so number 4 is I always start the vein, the deadwood shari very small, and then I'll increase it. All right, so if I pull it and it's only a couple of mil thick, and I'll find exactly where it is, then I'll start making it a little bit wider. So if the trunk of my tree across is, I don't know, let's say 3 centimetres across, something like that, then the shari might start being something around about the maybe 10 mil across, 1 centimetre maximum. Probably even less, probably around the 8 mil mark. So it's a really fine line that I follow. I wait, and the waiting could be 6 months, it could be 12 months. But I find that by letting the tree adjust by taking that shari line out, and then over time widening that shari line. So next time I work on it, it'll go from say 8 mil to maybe 12 mil, and then I'll let it go for another year, and it'll go from 12 mil maybe to 16 mil, something like that. It starts getting wider and wider, and the live vein, the part that I've left alone, is allowed to continue to grow. That'll heal. It'll try and heal up the work that you've done. You'll find that the cambium will start to be rolling in towards the middle. I simply just cut that off, so then it starts to retreat over time. And when I say time, it's years. It's never a quick process, but I find it's far more effective to be doing it little bit by little bit, rather than saying, okay, I'm going to take over 3 centimetres of trunk, I'm going to take 2 centimetres as deadwood, because it's chances of the tree surviving something drastic like that can be pretty limited. And I'm always in the favour of the tree to not only survive whatever it is that we do to it, but to get stronger and get better. So I find that by doing the shari lines really, really small in comparison to the trunk, and then gradually increasing them over time, means that I've got a tree that's going to keep going, keep thriving, and keep surviving. And if there are any incidents that I find with that live vein being removed, and it kills a branch somewhere up further or knocks out a root or something like that down below, the tree can adjust for it, and I can incorporate that into my design as well as I'm working through it. So, and the last thing is that step 5 on my checklist is to preserve the deadwood, but I never apply lime sulfur to the deadwood until it's dry. How do you know when it's dry? I generally let it get through one good summer of being baked in the heat, and you'll find that the wood goes from a wet yellowy colour to a more white colour naturally anyway, as it sort of greys up a little bit more. And then I use the lime sulfur to preserve the wood. You can use it to make the wood nice and white as well. That's up to you as an artist to choose what you want. Or another tip that I use is stamp pad ink. I find that if I get a little bit of lime sulfur into a little cup, it doesn't need to be much, maybe 5 or 10 mil, something like that, and then put a drop of the stamp pad ink in there and mix it around. It makes the lime sulfur very grey and gives it a more natural sort of look. So some people prefer that. Some people prefer it to be stark white. That's in the eye of the beholder. But using the lime sulfur regardless, I don't dilute it. I don't add water to it. I use it exactly as per the mix, because I find that what we get in Australia here is quite subtle anyway. It's not too strong, so it does the job of preserving the wood and preventing rot and all that sort of stuff, while giving it that nice white stark contrast to the live vein and the deep green foliage. So I'll just run through the checklist again. 1, follow the live vein. 2, make a small cut and follow it. Don't force it. So let the tree show you where those fibres run to, rather than you dictating, I'm going to cut here with my knife and pull the bark off. 3, work from the important section backwards, which for me generally is the top of the tree working down from that. So I don't start at the bottom and then work up and suddenly go, hang on a minute, I've just stripped off all the live vein that feeds to this major section of the tree's foliage. Number 4, start small and increase it over time. Don't think when you're creating that shari line that you've got to get to the end result too fast. Enjoy the ride. It's all part of it. Starting small and gradually increasing year upon year gives you a really safe way of doing it and allows the tree to adjust as well. And last, step 5 is to preserve the wood when you work on it. For me, preserving happens about once every year. When I work on my trees, I'll give the deadwood a nice spray with a pressure cleaner that I've got, a little deadwood cleaner that I use, and let it dry, and then I'll paint on the lime sulfur and preserve it. And that's just part of my yearly routine that I work for. But yeah, hopefully that's helped. Not everyone likes deadwood on their junipers. If you do, I've found that this is a really safe way to have a dabble and not go too far. All right, let's bring this baby home. One other thing that I'm on at the moment, or that is on my radar, that I am talking to people about that's happening, is checking air layers. So if you've done an air layer, it's a bit of a daunting task when you unwrap that plastic or whatever method you've used to check it to see if there's any root growth. And it's fine if there is. Often I'll do my layers around late winter. It's a controversial thing. I know people like to do them as they recently, sort of around the start of or in the last bit of spring, they'll like to do them to push the growth. But for me, I like to do mine a little bit earlier. So if you've only just done them, then maybe this is something for the future. If you've done them earlier, then it's probably about time now to check the layers and see where they're at. Have a quick look, very carefully unwrap, have a spread of some of that sphagnum, and fingers crossed. It's like Christmas morning. You should see a bunch of roots in there, and the tree should be doing really well. If it is, congratulations, well done. That's not the purpose of the podcast. Podcast that I want to chat about is when there's no roots there. You've gone and you've essentially ring barked the tree. You've done what you thought was correct and you've hoped that your air layers worked and you suddenly start ripping that plastic apart and it's been, a good couple of months and you're not seeing any roots, then you need to do something about it. You can't just leave it like that because the tree's going to keep trying to heal the wound that you've made and not put anything into root growth. It's going to be into new bark, basically. It's going to try and heal up the wound that you've made. So if you left it until next year to do any work, I think it'd be a little bit late. So for me, when they don't work, I will go back to the drawing board about now. And so for me, it would be, 3-4 months down the track. If nothing's happening in 3 or 4 months on a deciduous species, let's say it's a trident maple or something like that, then I would be, I'd be on it. I'd be redoing it. I'd be double checking everything. So the trick for me with the creation of the layer is you've got to make sure that there's complete separation between the upper portion where you want the roots to start growing and the lower portion, which is where the roots that are existing are pushing. And if you have that link between that top and that bottom, even though it looks like you've removed it all, more often than not, there's something still connecting those two fibres somewhere along the way that maybe haven't been removed thoroughly enough, and that's going to cause failure or delay of your air layer to work. So what I'll do is I find that, open it up, strip it all back, have a look. If it looks like it's doing absolutely nothing, then I'll chuck a little burr bit into my Dremel and I'll just go around the naked part of the trunk that I've stripped off, and I'll just make sure that I burr that very lightly. Like, you're not trying to gouge it out. You're not trying to take, mils of, a couple of mil of wood away from the tree. You just want to make sure that there's definitely nothing connecting it. And I find that the burr bit does enough to bite it up and separate it, that if you do right around the whole white wood, that you'll find that that's probably about enough to ensure that this is going to work. I wouldn't necessarily get in and start cutting the bark again where you've made the layers. I'd probably leave that one intact. But the thing that I do, which hopefully you do as well, is where the top section of the layer, I'll use a piece of wire, so it's about 3 mil or something like that, aluminium wire, and I'll put a tourniquet around just below where the cut's been made, and I'll tie it really tight. And I find that helps a couple of fold. It'll allow me to put the rooting hormone powder that I use to generate the new roots between the cut and the wire, so I can wedge it in there nice and tight so it doesn't wash away and it stays there and can do what it's got to do. Secondly, as those new roots start to push down and grow, they hit that wire and they start to push out. So it starts to flare the root system as opposed to going straight down the trunk, and then I've got an issue when I separate the layer and start to lay those roots down flat. So I would go through with a burr bit on my Dremel, and I would just take a good layer off all the way around to make sure that connection top to bottom has disappeared. That definitely it's gone. Second, I would put some new rooting hormone application, whatever it is. Some people use the gels, some people use the powders. I like the powders. I get the powder and I make it with water into like a slurry or a slushy sort of thing, and then I'll use the tip of one of my tools. It's got like a little an L on the end of it, and I'll just push that in. I'll wedge it in there and paste it right onto that bark layer where the wire is. Then I'll put the sphagnum back on there. Make sure that the sphagnum doesn't just get to the bottom of the top layer, but goes right the way up and over it. Then I'll reseal it. I use black plastic. Some people use clear with some aluminium on the outside. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Just don't leave it as clear. I think that's probably the worst when the sunlight gets to those roots. But yeah, wrap it up again. Make sure that it's nice and moist, that sphagnum moss, and that it doesn't dry out in the future. Keep it wet. However you choose to do that. For me, I use the top. I'll put a bit of wire around the top of the black plastic that I've wrapped around, so it sort of takes on a big ball shape, about the size of a I don't know, bigger than a tennis ball anyway, about 3 times the size of a tennis ball with sphagnum moss around it, and I'll leave the top slightly open, so there's a couple of millimetres around the trunk and where the plastic is. So if it does start to feel like that sphagnum's drying out, when I water, I can put a little bit of water in there. And it's also really important to note that the bottom one, I use a cable tie at the bottom of the black plastic, but I never make it so it's super tight. It always allows that water to flow out of there as well. I want a moist environment. I don't want a swimming pool in there for the roots to try and grow in, because it just won't work. So if you've checked it, it's failed, then I'd go through the process again. Just make sure that connection isn't there top to bottom, which is the most common reason why they don't work. And just do it slowly and do it again now, because you've still got a chance that by autumn next year the thing will have pushed out the new roots. Leaving it go longer, if you left it for a whole year before you inspected and actually did something about it, I think would be far worse than doing it again now, and just double checking it. Well, thanks for sticking around, folks. It's lovely to have your company. It means a hell of a lot to me. And I love the fact that the feedback comes through thick and fast after the podcast when they're uploaded, with questions or with confirmation that hey, that's great. I really appreciate that. That's what I do. So keep the Bonsai Love coming. It's really nice. I love it when I'm scouting around and I see the term Bonsai Love getting used more and more, which is really nice. It's good. It's good for all of us. What's good for one of us is good for all of us. We're a tribe, a worldwide tribe that's got a common unity of these this love for small trees, and it doesn't matter whether you want to plant seeds and grow little saplings, and that's your buzz to develop trees, or whether you want a 1,000,000-year-old masterpiece that's going to outlast time. It's the same passion that we all feel deeply into our core, which is lovely. So. Thank you for your patronage. Thank you extremely to the subscribers. You mean a hell of a lot to me. I know I bang on about it a bit, but it really does. So thank you. I'm not going to go on too much. Hopefully that's helped too with the black pines. Like, decandling is a major time on the bonsai calendar that we work towards. And knowing sooner rather than later will allow you to take appropriate steps to ensure that your trees are going to be in the best position they possibly can be. And that's what this all comes down to. If you're working on anything in your yard, it's about the strength and health of the trees. Absolutely. If it's too thick, cut it off. Make sure there's something viable behind it. If it's too dense, lighten it up. Improve the health and strength of the trees. That's everything that goes through my head whenever I'm working on any tree. Yeah, sure, I want them to look beautiful, but they look beautiful and become a piece of artwork when they're strong and healthy, because they give you so many options to work with. When they're not, you can go backwards a long way pretty quickly, and then you've just got to wait your time. Get on the treadmill and just stay in the one spot until the tree's actually improved. Learn from what you've done wrong, improve it, fix it, make it better, make it stronger, and keep taking steps forward, because that's what it's all about. So keep busy with your trees. It's a great time. I'm assuming Northern Hemisphere you'd be really busy now too. You'd be doing your final sort of cleanups before you head into the winter dormancy period and your final prune or thereabouts. But for us in South, especially in Australia, I'd say it's a great time to be working on your trees. I've found that tropical species that we've got now, as we're heading towards the warmer times, there's a lot of work to be done there as well. So keep those scissors sharp, keep them clean, and keep them snipping, because you need to be on top of it. Thank you for listening in, and as always, until next time, happy bonsai.